morning once again, and thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolutely wondrous occasion. The place, the people, everything about it is absolutely magical. Before I begin, my pranams and thank you to Swamiji, to the entire mission and all the people, especially to Captain for inviting me here and his entire team, and so many other luminaries. I'll run out of time if I mention each one of you, but especially Mr. Hegde there, who's been an inspiration, and like so many others. Thank you so much for calling me. More so because the fact is that I am normally called only once to a place. People don't call me the second time. I remember an occasion where a very dear friend, who was in Rajya Sabha MP, no less, he invited me for a conference he was organizing on dynasty, a scourge in Indian politics. And of course, he being a BJP Rajya Sabha MP, the idea was to completely knock the living daylights out of Congress. That is a party of dynas. And when my turn came, I listed out 94 names of BJP MPs and MLAs who are also dynas. So we do remain friends, but of course, even my, my speech, the YouTube video also has been removed from their auspices. But he's an absolutely dear friend. Then I think it was Fiki who invited me to talk about how corruption has decreased in the last 10 years under the BJP, and I promptly went there and listed out 7 or 8 huge instances of where corruption has not just decreased, but actually increased. So that's the end of Fiki inviting me ever again. Then there was on the sidelines of the forthcoming G20 thing, I was invited to a place where Lieutenant Governor, no less, was sitting there, and I said for what he had stated, that the fellow should be suspended for a month. After that, I had to run from that city, so there's no chance of my being invited there again. But I do hope, because of this truant nature that has endeared to so many, I'm very grateful. Even if I'm not invited to this place, I will come on my own, and it's such a magical place. So thank you so much again. As for the topic that I thought I would talk on, and of course I would want it to be roughly split half and half, so that I love to have almost like an interactive session. There's so many youngsters out here and so many learned people, so I would love to listen to any questions and comments that you may have. So I think the way I've structured it, Captain, is that roughly 45 minutes I'll talk, and then the next 45 or even more, we will keep it for question and answer session to give opportunity to all of you to ask and for us to interact. But as the topic goes, India towards 2047, that would be 100 years of our modern republic, a land of opportunities. So before I begin, I'd like to have a show of hands as to how many of you believe that India is a land of opportunities. Almost everyone, except a few communists there, but that's okay. No, just joking. I'm from JNU, so I can spot a communist a mile away. No, and now is the real thing that I dare say I haven't even told the captain. A twist in the tale, because what worth a tale if it doesn't have a twist? All of us here, you see, are of course bone and flesh humans, but at the end of the day, we are just cinders, fritters. We are remnants, as I said, of an 8,000-year-old civilization. What we say here, what we represent, doesn't matter at all. We don't crave for credit. The people who chiseled Khajuraho, one of our greatest creation, we don't know their names, so never talk of credit. So what we say and what we do is not important in the current moment of space and time. It has ramifications for our next generation and for their next generation. It has ramifications for the next 8,000 years that I firmly believe we should be able to survive sufficiently. So I ask you again, hand on heart, how many of you believe that India is a land of missed opportunities? I am proud of you. Thank you so much. Because that's the truth. That's the truth that we somehow, either deliberately or otherwise, because we feel squeamish about it, fail to acknowledge the brutal fact that more than India being a land of opportunities, India is a land of missed opportunities. Now, I can give you a lecture for the next 45 minutes on India being a land of opportunities, but that would be what politicians do and governors do. It's boring because you've heard it from almost every mouth who's entered either a government or an esteemed organization. So I want to talk about the other aspect, where equal number of hands have been raised, which is India is a land of missed opportunities. And I just don't do it because I am a compulsive contrarian or I am a pessimist. I do it for two reasons. One is I want to learn from you agreements and disagreements at the end when my lecture finishes as to what do you think of this. And second, when I say I want to learn, I firmly believe that a teacher who stops being a student stops being a teacher. So for me, if I were to call myself a teacher, I want to learn at every moment of my breathing life something new, something that isn't right that can be corrected, something that is not to be done for me, but something that I owe it to my children and their children. We are keepers of a flame. We did not ignite the flame. Please remember that. So the way I have structured this is that I already kind of took it for granted that all of you would agree with me that I talk about India being a land of missed opportunities. A bit naughty of me there, but I think all of us would want to listen about that, because for me, one can mock and ridicule every ism except criticism. Because it is only through learning when somebody has criticized you that you can better yourself. And I don't want to better myself. I want this land to be better for my children and their children. So I have divided this talk roughly of 10 to 15 minutes each on various domains where I believe firmly that we were and are and remain a land of opportunities, but we exhibited ourselves in these domains as a land of missed opportunities. Hopefully, we would correct ourselves. And these domains are, to begin with, science, and then I'll move on to sustenance, and then I'll talk a little bit about the other aspects that we've completely not just missed the opportunity, we've not even seen the opportunity, and finally to industry and businesses. So, and because when you talk about science, you have to be absolutely careful, you have to be ruthlessly objective, you have to watch every word, what you say. I have structured what I want to talk about in this domain of science, and I have written it, and then we will move forward about other domains. So let me begin by elaborating on the missed opportunities in the field of science. And by missed opportunities, I not only mean by way of business, as I said, cultural, educational, or social, and I will come to each one of these domains shortly. Also, by missed opportunities, I absolutely certainly do not mean missing an opportunity of exploiting human misery or disease. Not at all. of what I'm going to talk of next. By missed opportunity, I mean missing the opportunity of saving tens of thousands, if not millions of lives. I talk here of COVID. It is surreal, almost dreamlike, of how quickly we have reverted to what life was before COVID. Almost as though COVID did not happen or COVID did not disrupt, damage, dismantle, destroy our lives and livelihood for 3 years. There is not a single soul here, thank God for that, who's wearing a mask. Hand wash, masks, sanitizers, social distancing. These words and phrases have now disappeared from our lexicon as quickly as they appeared in 2020. Nonetheless, it is important, in fact, it is vital that we revisit the pandemic and learn and take lessons from it, if we are to avoid another soon or indeed when it arrives. Deal with it better than we dealt with the COVID pandemic last 3 years. Let me, though, begin by acknowledging something that isn't acknowledged enough. And it is this, that the administration of 2 billion doses of anti-COVID vaccines within a year is arguably, and I believe definitely, independent India's greatest achievement. And unquestionably, Mr. Modi's greatest achievement. And everyone involved in this incredible enterprise, from the President and the Prime Minister down, deserves the highest praise possible. It showed the power of science and the power of a nation that believes in the power of science. It showed the faith Indians have in science and scientists. It showed India to be, well, incredible India. That said, the task before us as Indians who love our country and want to constantly improve so that we can tackle the next pandemic better is to identify where we fell short, where we were found wanting, where we failed and where we missed an opportunity. As I say, mock and ridicule every ism except criticism. And one thing that needs to be criticized but hasn't been, both by those in the ruling dispensation for fear of reprisals and those in the opposition for fear of exposing their ignorance, is the boast that India is the world hub for vaccine research. The SARS-CoV-2, SARS coronavirus 2 genome was made public on the 12th of January 2020. Seems all those years ago. 24 hours later, on 13th of January 2020, the American pharma company Moderna had synthesized their mRNA vaccine against COVID. And they had submitted it for clinical trials 24 hours later. The virus, on the other hand, was cultured by 24th January 2020 in Australia and 2nd February 2020 in the USA. Culturing this virus was important because this would have been the fastest route to the conventional vaccine. India, on the other hand, managed to culture the virus 2 months later, on 16th of March 2020. And it was only 2 months after that, on 9th of May 2020, that this strain was transferred onto Bharat Biotech for the manufacture of Covaxin. Once the live culture virus was rendered impotent or avirulent by chemical inactivation, the human trials began in July 2020. So a virus that was cultured in January by Australia was deployed as a vaccine by India only 6 months later. Is this what world vaccine hubs do? Trail the rest of the world by 6 months? By 7th of February 2020, the Jenner Institute in Oxford had already synthesized their anti-COVID vaccine and set it up for clinical trials. This was the vaccine that was mass-produced in India by the Serum Institute and named Covishield. While Bharat Biotech's Covaxin was a live attenuated vaccine or inactivated vaccine. Covishield utilized a chimpanzee adenovirus-based vector system to deliver the part of coronavirus that would then elicit human immune response and protect us when we got infected with the real virus. The technology was not new and has been used previously for synthesizing vaccines against other diseases. For example, the same replication-deficient chimpanzee adenovirus was used earlier by the same Oxford scientists for smuggling in the MERS coronavirus spike protein, or for the MERS coronavirus vaccine. In fact, this technology is 20 years old. It was first used as a carrier in 2002 for a rabies vaccine. India and Indian scientists were very much aware of this technology and had employed it for testing vaccines against malaria and even chikungunya. But real speed was shown by a country that never gloated as a world vaccine hub. Soon as the SARS-2 coronavirus genome sequence was made public, as I said, on 12th of January 2020, the Oxford scientists went to work, and on 17th February 2020, they had initiated the safety and other clinical trials of this Covishield vaccine. And as early as 23rd April 2020, the phase 1 trial results were published. The perfect storm lay in wait for us a year later, and we had no inkling of it. India had administered approximately 100 million vaccine doses by April of 2021, just at the onset of the Delta wave. Only 4 crore people over the age of 60 had been vaccinated. Only 1.8% of Indian population was fully vaccinated. And we are the world hub of vaccine research, we claimed. And here is the harsh truth. From January till May of 2021, we had already saved 124 million lives through vaccinations. We could have saved so many more. Our speed was not even 1 million shots per day. This, despite knowing the spectacular ICMR results, that out of 110 million Indians initially vaccinated with the first dose, only 21,300 went on to contract COVID, a success of 99.99%. People died during the second wave because they weren't vaccinated, plain and simple. 1 Indian vaccinated meant 1 oxygen cylinder less, 1 death less. Tens of thousands died. One feels terrible for what their near and dear ones went through, are going through now as they see all of us without masks. Not a single family remained untouched from the COVID scourge. There is nothing worse than a what if in medicine. What if he had got that drug in time? What if he had got that vaccine in time? If we could have vaccinated 25 million Indians on Prime Minister's birthday, which we did, why couldn't we do 25 million a day back in March or April 2021? Especially when the government had claimed there was no vaccine shortage. These questions should have been asked by the people in charge because lives were at stake. People died, but these questions weren't asked. Away from the science and R&D of vaccines, there was also the situation that during the devastating Delta wave, both the center and the states messed up, abdicated their responsibilities, and left it to the citizens to fend for themselves. By all accounts, the Indian mutant in Maharashtra, as well as the UK mutant in Delhi and Punjab, had a lot to do with the ferocity of the second wave, the so-called Delta wave. We had sequenced the Indian mutant back in October 2020. That was the time to carry out contact tracing, isolate those who harbored it, and nip it in the bud.
we failed to do that. We ran out of funds to speed up genome sequencing. Instead, we made statements like, quote, "COVID has reached its end game," unquote, with our experts even displaying graphs that predicted COVID disappearing altogether. We stopped adhering to COVID norms. We arranged massive political rallies, religious festivals, protests. And through all this, one may ask that while it is routine for the politicians to abdicate their responsibilities at the altar of electoral expediency or appeasing vote banks, what was our Supreme Court doing? The short answer is nothing. I already have a contempt case against me, so it doesn't really matter if Supreme Court goes after me again. Given our inadequate health infrastructure, shouldn't we have been extra vigilant? The signs were all there, but we refused to see them. Most nations that had suffered the first wave experienced an even bigger second wave. America had faced a catastrophic oxygen scarcity in California in December and January of 2020. Couldn't our health and science task forces have foreseen a drastic upsurge in oxygen requirement during our second wave? After masks and vaccines, it was oxygen that was saving lives. Its need was way more urgent than the other two because it was a matter of life and death and seconds counted. Questions needed to be asked from the center and the states, both, but no one asked them and no one answered. Our daily production of medical grade oxygen was 3,200 metric tons. It was a fact that oxygen shortage of the magnitude that was felt during the second wave was not felt during the first wave. So the question to be asked was, did those in charge think the second wave would not be as big as the first? And if they thought this, what were their reasons for thinking this? Did they not anticipate that the second wave could be much larger than the first, given that this had been the case for every other nation? And therefore, if would have logically followed that we would have needed much more than just 3,200 metric tons of medical oxygen to get us through the second wave. The center claimed during the Delta wave that our requirement is going to be 7,000 MT per day. But again, what made them come to this figure? Did they know for certainty that when the peak was going to be reached? Did they know that the requirement was 7,000 MT for sure? What if it was 10,000 MT per day or even 15,000 metric tons? That was not a single politician or health official who correctly figured out the amount of oxygen we would need in the second wave. Not one. They were all cutting ribbons of hastily set up oxygen plants. The issue was further muddled by the media peddling fake news of us exporting medical oxygen when in fact we had exported industrial oxygen. And that to only 0.4% of our yearly output of 2.19 million metric tons. But that doesn't absolve the powers whose responsibility it was to predict the medical oxygen requirement for the second wave and to keep enough as a buffer. On top of this, we suffered logistical issues with one state hindering movement of oxygen to another. The companies themselves were complaining of the highways being blocked by the protesting farmers, but no politician had the guts to remove the illegal protests and blockades. It was sheer cruelty to not be able to administer oxygen to the needy patient. So much more cruel than not having a vaccine or not wearing a mask, because the need was immediate, and that need decided between life and death. Who ultimately, I ask, took responsibility for the misery and deaths faced by the citizens? The jury is still out whether this virus was a man-made disaster or not, but our suffering in the second wave certainly was. We were in a race against time to save as many lives as possible. While our daily vaccination capacity was 6 million doses, we almost never touched this figure in all the months preceding the Delta wave, managing barely 500,000 per day or thereabouts. The vaccination drive just wasn't fast enough. As Delta wave started in earnest, Delhi had more than 1.5 lakh positive cases every week. The true figure would have been at least 5 times that. because the more you tested, the more you discovered the positives, and Delhi was testing around 85,000 to 1 lakh every day. 6% of all COVID positives required hospitalization. Delhi had only 20,000 COVID beds and 50,000 beds overall. So it was impossible to hospitalize every needy patient. Vaccination was the only solution. But here too, Delhi had not even vaccinated 8% of its population, even as it entered the devastating Delta wave. The simple truth was that the entire vaccination discovery, trials, manufacturing, and then administration was like the great Indian wedding. The groom was late, the bride was crying, the food wasn't ready, there was a power cut, the generator didn't work, the Panditji went missing. But in the end, it all came together well, except the Fufaji, i.e. me, who is never satisfied. But I hope you will appreciate that we need Fufajis. We need them to tell us what went wrong and what we missed and what we need to do to become better. Because the truth is, there's always a pandemic round the corner. We cannot avoid it. How can we when we haven't in a billion years? We have co-evolved with viruses. 10% of our genome is viral DNA. The question to be asked is, are we prepared for the next viral perfect storm? That's the question. Away from COVID, let me now focus on another aspect of diseases and their cures that we as a nation have an unimaginable advantage. But true to our habit, it remains untapped. But I get ahead of ourselves. To predict our future India in 2047, we need to first analyze our past. The best way to predict what India would be in 25 years from now is to see what we were 25 years ago. Recently, an ICMR report brought out 2 revealing pie charts that dealt with the contribution of major disease groups to total DALYs in India. DALY is disability adjusted life years. How many people are affected by the diseases and how their lives are affected. In 1990, the pie chart, and in 2016. The standard metric, as I said, is DALY, is used the world over when categorizing the epidemiological effect of any disease on a given population. So in simple words, one is looking at the kind of diseases Indians were afflicted with in 1990 and presently. So in 1990, before liberalization that is, 60% of the diseases affecting Indians were communicable diseases. Bacterial diseases like tuberculosis or MRSA or cholera, vector-borne diseases like malaria and dengue, viral diseases like AIDS, hepatitis, influenza, measles. And only 30% were non-communicable diseases like the cardiovascular or cancer or asthma or diabetes. In the past 30 years, growing economic prosperity, burgeoning middle class, taking 430 million odd people out of abject poverty has meant that the pie charts have totally flipped now. 70% of the diseases affecting Indians are now non-communicable diseases. 70%. Are we ready for this tsunami that is going to come our way? When the pie chart flips, it tells you 2 things, from communicable to non-communicable. It tells you, A, that yes, India is getting prosperous, but it also tells you that India awaits a catastrophe. It tells you that there is an opportunity, but it tells you that we might already have missed that opportunity. And I say that at the back of a recent Lancet paper that has been published through the research carried out by a group in India, in ICMR and abroad, led by Dr. Mohan principally. that says there already are as many as 10% of our population who are diabetics. That's 140 million people, Indians, are already diabetics. And pre-diabetics, it says 15 to 20% of our population. That's more than the population of Brazil. That many Indians are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. What are we doing about it? That's the question going forward. Because going forward, I'm very sure, given the genetic techniques, and I know a lot of them in molecular biology, that we would have developed cures for the communicable diseases by 2047. The government says it will eradicate tuberculosis by 2025, which is just 2 years from now, and malaria by 2030. Well, that's the thing with politicians. They never meet deadlines, but they always set them. And the scientists, they never set deadlines, but they always meet them. But be that as it may, if not by 2025, tuberculosis certainly would be eradicated by 2047. But that's not the tsunami that's coming our way. The tsunami of tuberculosis came in the 60s and the 70s, and then when HIV came up in the 80s, then most people who died of HIV actually died of tuberculosis. So the next wave of tuberculosis was in the 90s through drug resistance. So tuberculosis is not the impending wave. The impending wave is directly because of our prosperity. Do we have a drug? Is there an indigenous drug that India has developed against diabetic? But before I go down that lane, I want another show of hands. How many of you know who Lakshmi Kutty is? Okay. Not a single hand has gone up. And a year ago, I would have joined this crowd in not being able to raise my hand. Lakshmi Kutty is an 85-year-old frail lady from the forests of the Western Ghats, going down to Kerala, who won the Padma Shri Award 3 years ago. It is because most of her adult life, she has been collecting and cataloging medicinal plants that belong to the forest where she lives. She has a cornucopia or a library of 500 medicinal plants. Many of them would result in giving out super drugs that the pharma companies may get billions of dollars by selling. But have we investigated any of those medicinal plants by Lakshmi Kutty? By now, we all know, and the Honorable Chancellor and Vice Chancellors, and I was talking to them, they were telling us the incredible biodiversity that India is blessed with. We would have already found out cures to not just all the diseases we have, but even of the diseases that we aren't even afflicted with right now. We would have catalogued drugs against the diseases that are of the future. What to talk of the present? Forget about one. There should have been 500 Lakshmi Kutty Natural Products Institutes by now. And each one of them given just one job: take a plant, find out what is the active molecule in it that Lakshmi Kutty says is going to cure this disease. Have we done it? Forget 500, there isn't even one. We used to be world beaters in natural products chemistry in the 1950s, but we completely lost that race. In this race for Western aping, we forgot what we were good at. And I'll tell you what will happen, because I have seen the past. And the past is that a Chinese lady, a frail Chinese lady, just like Lakshmi Kutty, went to the jungles where she was living in the interiors of China, discovered a plant, extracted the molecule out of it. And that molecule right now is the only certifiable cure for malaria. That molecule is artemisinin. Just like one of Lakshmi Kutty's medicinal plants, that Chinese lady took out this molecule from that plant. But that's not the end of the story. Artemisinin is the only viable cure for malaria because chloroquine, there is rampant drug resistance against it. This lady got the Nobel Prize for her discovery. She published it in a journal that those in the know, each journal publishes an impact factor. That impact factor of that journal wasn't even 1. In context, the more popular the journal, the more the journal scientific fraternity runs after is those journals with impossibly high impact factor, like Nature is probably 40, 50, Cell is 60, Science is even 80, Lancet is probably crossed 100. This Chinese Nobel laureate who discovered that drug published in a journal of impact factor of 0.9. Think about it for a second. She was China's Lakshmi Kutty, and we have forgotten our own Lakshmi Kutty. And I'll tell you what will happen. I've told you the past and I'll tell you the future. That some European scientist or an American team or an Australian team would seek permission, obtain it, go into the jungles of Western Ghats and Kerala, talk to Lakshmi Kutty, get hold of her library of 500 medicinal plants, take it to their countries, find out which active molecule is in each one of those plants, generate that active molecule. One of them would be a cure for diabetes, and they would get the Nobel Prize for it. And Lakshmi Kutty would still remain in those jungles. And once that American gets the Nobel Prize, we would give Lakshmi Kutty a Padma Bhushan or a Padma Vibhushan, or if she is lucky, a Bharat Ratna. Is this not a land of missed opportunity, I ask you, objectively? When we have something and we don't act on it, what can be worse than that? So, on science, I leave it there because the other aspects are equally painful, but this is not a tale of Chinese tortures. Let me go to something that affects not just what we do in the next 20, 30, 40 years, but what we would be in the next 200, 300, 400 years. I talk of the technology that even the Supreme Court has implored our governments, cutting across party lines over the last 30 years, to act. But we have failed to act. Forget about in a huge or a major way, even in a limited way. I talk of the fact that while in this country, huge swathes of lands are affected by famine and drought, at the same time, equally huge swathes of land are wrecked by floods. We've seen what happened in Uttarakhand. We've seen the drought in Chhattisgarh. We've seen sometimes even in the same state, because of the largeness of this country, we have an area that is wrecked by famine and an area that is wrecked by flood. The most obvious way to remove this problem, to solve this, was river linking. Now, this is not a figment of somebody's imagination that you talk of linking rivers so that excess waters from one place will go to the place where the waters are deprived. This has been deliberated for more than 40 years. There have been at least 12 bona fide expert scientific committees that have worked on this, that have submitted their reports to the Supreme Court. There are Supreme Court judgments that say, implore the government, what are you doing? Why are you worried about the next 5 years or election cycle? Why aren't you worrying about 50 years? We need river linking. 63% of our irrigatable water goes into the sea, wasted. 63% of the water that can be used for irrigation. Is this not a calamity? In 45 years, our water availability per capita has more than halved. Where is the water going for in 2047? All of us have felt the paucity of water, but that's just a fraction of what lies in wait. unless we act on it. Why aren't we acting on it? 4 years ago, there was this parched region of Maharashtra, Latur, and water trains were going there to take water. That was not all. The tragedy was that politicians were cutting ribbons when the water train would move from one station to the next. They were proud of it. The politicians were inaugurating those water trains. What can be more shameful than that? We are going to face a catastrophe. We have been offered solutions for the last 30 years. India was a land of opportunity 30 years ago. Today, it is a land of missed opportunity. And it will not be even a land of any opportunity if we do not start thinking about these massive projects now. Let me swiftly come to the next aspect when I talked about independent India's greatest achievement, which was vaccinating within a span of 1 year, 1 billion people twice over. Let me talk about India's biggest disaster, independent India's biggest disaster. And what I find very perplexing is that everyone has seen it, and it's almost as if the news cycle, it entered the news cycle, independent India's biggest disastrous decision, and it exited. And we are just living our lives unconcerned. I talk here about the repeal of the 3 farm reforms. I need to give you a background before you understand how calamitous the repeal of these 3 farm laws have been. And why do I say this? Yes, I've been accused of hyperbole before, and television debates do lend oneself to that, but trust me, this is not hyperbole. These are facts I'm giving. India is the world's 2nd largest producer of sugarcane. Every year, we grow 350 billion kilograms of sugarcane. Sugarcane is one of the most extensive water-guzzling crops. It requires only 7% of arable land, but 78% of irrigation water. The amount of sugarcane, the amount of water required to grow 350 billion kilograms of sugarcane every year that we do is equivalent of 1 quadrillion liters. I had heard till billion, million, trillion. I had not even heard of quadrillion. And just to give you an idea of how much this is, to make your life easier, I have calculated this. 1 quadrillion liters is equivalent of the water that is present in 10 Ganga Sagar dams. 10 Ganga Sagar dams. That is the amount of water that we use every year to irrigate a sugarcane crop and grow sugarcane. And sugar prices, they have halved in the last 6 years. This is the issue that we face. And an ex-chief minister, a BJP chief minister of Maharashtra, did a great thing 7 years ago, 6 years ago. He said, this country can no longer afford to blindly grow sugarcane. If you want to grow sugarcane, you have to seek permission from the government. So it was not a draconian thing, because he says, seek our permission and we will give it. But it was trend setting, because everyone knows what seeking government permission means. It is more than the lifespan of the person who is actually seeking it. So people knew that this was a fantastic way to regulate and restrict the growing of this water-guzzling crop. Within a week, that decision was rescinded. He had to take back that, because one other politician I wouldn't name, who's got India's 2nd or 3rd highest award, required water and sugarcane for the sugar industry and molasses industry and liquor making industry in Maharashtra. This is how our politicians think. They are thinking day to day, week to week, month to month. They are not thinking Forget about year to year. They aren't thinking decade to decade. They aren't thinking centuries to centuries. An opportunity can come in a day, can be realized in a week, but a missed opportunity will destroy decades and centuries. And what happened? One thing led to another. When the election cycle is entered, the politicians gave out huge newspaper ads congratulating them and their parties for increasing the MSP equivalent that the government gives to sugarcane. The government is buying more and more sugarcane from the farmer because it's a vote bank. We have the capacity of the FCI go down is about 30 million tons of buffer capacity of rice. Right now there is more than 101 million tons of rice that we have. 60 million tons over and above what we actually require as a buffer capacity. But which government has the guts to refuse buying rice, buying wheat from these farmers? This extra 60 million tons is not to be ever used by the humans. It's being used, being made for, stored for rats. If only rats could vote, maybe then the policies might change. Agriculture contributes only 12.5 to 13% to our GDP. But it employs 44%. 44% of our 515 million strong ready labor force. 44%. That's like 250, 300 million odd people. In the West, it is 2%. Even in economies that are middle income or fast approaching that, it is not more than 3%. 44% of people are involved in agriculture. It's unbelievable. 83% of all Indian households are in one way or the other dependent upon agriculture. From produce to storage, the whole chain is medieval, archaic. It is not a productive sector of our economy. It is inflexible. Farmers are at the mercy of elements. 170,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last 15 years. 95% of the farmers are not insured. This is the sector. We are calling ourselves a land of opportunities. What are we doing to this sector? Now let me come to what people decided to do, what Narendra Modi decided to do. He brought in these 3 farm reforms. How do you judge the success of a reform or the impact of a reform? To me, I just don't judge it by that it is required by logic and rationale, because yes, every reform is required by definition, because that is how human evolutions work, except some monotheistic religions where reform is forbidden. Reform is essential for the development of a human being. So yes, every step, every reform is important. But the impact of this reform that Narendra Modi brought in would have transformed us, would have catapulted us to a middle income economy within 15 years flat. By middle income, I mean roughly GDP per capita becomes $14,000 to $15,000. Right now it is $2,000. And what were these 3 reforms? The first reform was that the farmer need not any longer be forced to sell his produce at a government marketplace, the so-called APMCs, Agricultural Produce Market Committees. The second reform was that we will almost abrogate the Essential Commodities Act. And the third reform was that we will employ contract farming. 1, 2, 3. These 3 reforms almost verbatim, were in the election manifestos of not the BJP, not Modi who carried out these reforms, but were in the election manifesto of the Congress party. You check up number 11, number 19, number 27 of the 2019 manifesto. They were in the manifesto and election promises of AAP, of TMC. All the opposition parties wanted exactly these 3 reforms, but of an even higher grade, while Modi had said the farmers can be given a choice, because that is the bedrock of progress, choice. Modi said, you give choice to the farmers. You can either go to the government mandis or you go to the private mandis. Congress wanted to abrogate government mandis altogether. They said, we will remove APMCs. What happened? The Congress, before I tell you what happened, the third reform had already been enacted in a Congress state in Punjab under Captain Amrinder Singh. Contract farming had already been realized. They were carrying it out. But what happened the moment Modi brought in these 3 reforms? Black laws, shut country down, anti-farmer, anti-this, anti-that. Delhi blocked, 5 highways blocked for a year. Every day, Delhi, the country suffered an economic loss of 3,000 crores. All those shops that were lining the highways, they were shut. Millions, perhaps billions, tens of billions of dollars of economic loss. Who is responsible for this? Is this a land of opportunities? And then, when you take these reforms back, repeal the reform, the saddest day of this country, according to me, because the impact was for 300 million people. The day you take it, you do not explain it. You just say कि मैं देश किसानों के हित में ये reforms लाया था, देश हित में वापस ले रहा हूँ. I'm sorry. That was the biggest anti-national step you can think of. देश का हित तो farmers के reforms में था. Farm reforms were देश हित. Removing them is an anti-national step. But I don't care. Politicians can say whatever they want. But the real land of opportunity is America, where the people have the power. They can actually file a class action suit against the government. In this country, 300 million farmers who were promised health, wealth, and prosperity by bringing in these reforms should have been able to sue the pants of the government that you promised us this. For 1 year, you had these laws, and now suddenly on your whim, you say you're taking them back. Give me the money that you promised. Right now, the money that I've lost and what I purport to lose for the next 15 years. If we can have retrospective taxation in this country, going back 10 years, why can't we have prospective asking the government to pay us what you promised us? But it never happened. But again, I say, I am willing to forgive a politician because by definition, a politician has 9 lives. And a politician, by definition, is hypocritical. So I don't mind politicians doing the things they do. What pained me and hurt me was that we were let down not by the legislature, we were let down by the judiciary. It was the Supreme Court whose duty it was to make sure that when for 16 years we've been deliberating on these farm reforms, when every rational, logical, scientist, farmer, everyone has said these reforms are required. If you read the Swaminathan Committee report, you read tons of reports. When the farmers were for it, on what basis did the Supreme Court stay these? But worse than that, on what basis did the Supreme Court actually say that we only see the people who are against the farm reforms, i.e. the protesters? Where are the people who are for the farm reforms? We don't see them. This is what pained me, because what it tells you is that even the judiciary is not interested in meting out justice. It wants anarchy. Did it want those millions of farmers, tens of millions who are toiling in the fields in Karnataka, in Odisha, in Tamil Nadu, in Kerala, to leave what they are growing, to leave what they are producing, come to Supreme Court, have a placard and sit there saying we demand farm reforms? Is this how a democracy is supposed to work? But sadly, we were let down by the politicians, by the Supreme Court. And it goes on and on and on. Finally, before I end and throw it open to the question and answer session that I am expecting would be lively, I want to talk of a couple of things. The first is something that, again, we see in front of us, but we, leave alone, refuse to acknowledge it as missed opportunity. We don't even talk about it. This is the sector that pains me most, and this is the sector that I talk about now, which is tourism. This is the lowest hanging fruit India can think of. We are blessed with some of the greatest creations of man or nature in this country. We are India because of those. But at the end of the day, it is Paris that attracts 44 million foreigners every year. And it is India that attracts only 11 million foreigners. Paris, a small city, 40 million. India, a glorious land of tens of thousands of historical monuments and wondrous places, natural and man-made, attracts only 11 million. Only 1 million foreigners go and visit the Puri temple. Only 6% of direct jobs are through tourism. It should be 300 million we should be employing, because we are getting 100% foreign exchange. There are more hotel rooms in UAE than in India. What can I say? This data is so painful. I'm sorry I'm giving you this data, but I think the time has come to realize about the things that we are not doing. We talk of Vatican earning billions of dollars in revenue. Everyone wants to go and see Vatican. Bodh Gaya, the municipal budget for Bodh Gaya, that should be the Vatican of the East, where Lord Buddha attained his nirvana, gave his sermon. The municipal budget of Bodh Gaya is less than the amount it took to produce the film Adipurush. There are 400 million Buddhists worldwide. Why can't Bodh Gaya become the Vatican of the East, to use this phrase? There are tens of thousands of examples like that. What have we done? The progress has been incremental. A place like Mangalore, we were just talking, is just absolutely divine. It's wonderful. How many tourists visit Bangalore every year? Yes, now we have an airport, which is wonderful, but other than that, this is a sector that has been crying out, that is crying out, and I hope it doesn't cry out in the future for a requirement not just of the government, but of keeping the flame alive. And finally, I come to something that first endeared me to Narendra Modi. And this is something that Indians, we as Indians, if we don't think about it now, I think our future is very bleak. In 2013, the Prime Minister said, India has no business to be in business. It was one of those amazing phrases that he repeated in 2017 and again in 2019. Because what he said was absolutely right. Government, sorry, did I say India has no business? I meant governments have no business to be in business. But unfortunately, his government, like every other previous government, all they have done is to be in the business of being business. A very young economist, Karan Bhasin, and I took the trouble of tabulating how many public sector units we have in this country, state and central. So we have around 1,840 odd public sector units. 21% of our annual budgetary allowance that Ms. Sitaraman dishes out every year, 21% goes into propping up these units. 400 of these are non-functional. They aren't working. They aren't units anymore. But the government is paying money. There was one unit that was supposed to be making chlorofluorocarbons that the government thankfully banned 2 years ago. Chlorofluorocarbons were banned in the late 80s by the WHO because they were eating away the ozone hole. But this company, PSU, was eating away the government thousands of crores. Governments cannot run businesses. It goes against the Darwinian spirit of evolution, of competition, of fair-mindedness, of ethical capitalism. But we have governments, we have banks that were nationalized illegally, overturning a Supreme Court judgment by the Congress. We have government banks that are a kind of a den for corruption. We have public sector units. These are the issues that will drag us down more than the land of opportunities. India today is a land of missed opportunities, because I'll tell you how. I see so many luminaries out here. They have sacrificed so much, trust me, because they are my parents' age. And I know how much sacrifice they did. their governments were cruel to them. Nehru's governments, Indira's governments, to some extent, yes, till Indira Gandhi. Then I see people who are my age here. We were ruined by the governments that ruled us, Rajiv Gandhi, later on going forward. I don't want the youngsters who I see here to be ruined by either the present dispensation or the ones following them. Every generation is to be a missed opportunity generation. We were saved through liberalization in 1990. Actually saved. We had mortgaged our gold. Our foreign reserves right now that are $600 billion were not even $1 billion then, $0.6 billion. We mortgaged our gold, we packed our gold onto ships, and they were about to land on the shores of England to be mortgaged with Bank of England. And we say, by all accounts, partly it is true that Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh saved us. But the ones who really saved us were the threats by the IMF and the World Bank, that if we don't change our policies, they are not going to settle our debt and give us money. So we were dictated to, and we changed. And we changed for the better. We unshackled at least one foot. But the other foot of this country is still shackled. And I want that shackle to be removed as well. So that India, more than being a land of missed opportunity, becomes a land of opportunity. Thank you very much. Now we can open to questions.